Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. Arrival at the terminal. The hum of engines warming on the tarmac filled the air as Nia Edwards stepped out of the sleek black car that had just delivered her to the private jet terminal. The driver, a man who greeted her with respect but didn't hover, opened her door and handed her a slim leather briefcase. Nia nodded her thanks, her eyes scanning the terminal with the precision of someone who always anticipated every possible scenario. She was dressed immaculately, as always. Her navy blue blazer, tailored to perfection, framed her strong shoulders, and her cream blouse was crisp and unwrinkled despite the long drive. Her natural curls were styled into a crown of elegance, framing her striking features. To some, she looked like she belonged on the cover of a business magazine. To others, particularly those with deep-seated biases, her presence challenged the norm. Nia strode toward the terminal entrance with a purpose. Today's flight wasn't just another trip, it was the culmination of years of effort, sleepless nights, and relentless determination. She had built her company, Horizons Unlimited, from the ground up, starting in a cramped one-bedroom apartment and scaling it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Today, she was flying to a meeting that would secure an international partnership, taking her brand global. The polished glass doors slid open as she approached, and her heels clicked against the marble floor of the terminal. The space radiated exclusivity, sleek leather armchairs arranged in curated clusters, chandeliers casting soft light, and the faint aroma of freshly brewed espresso. For most, this was a symbol of luxury. For Nia, it was a stage. Her assistant had arranged everything in advance, the jet, the pilots, and her itinerary. The flight was hers, purchased outright, like the rest of her assets. Nia's journey had always been about ownership. She refused to lease her dreams to anyone. As she approached the check-in desk, her confidence was met with subtle, lingering stares. A few heads turned, some curious, some dismissive. Nia was accustomed to this. In rooms where power and privilege converged, she often stood out. Not because of her power, she had that in spades, but because people weren't accustomed to seeing it embodied by someone like her. At the desk stood a middle-aged security guard, his uniform pressed and his expression stern. He glanced at her briefly, then back at his clipboard. Nia set her briefcase down gently and smiled. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice even and warm. "I'm here for the 2:30 flight on Jet Horizons." The man's eyes darted up to meet hers briefly, then fell again to the papers in his hand. "Name?" he asked curtly. "Nia Edwards," she replied, handing over her identification. He stared at the ID for a long moment before narrowing his eyes and glancing back at her. Something shifted in his demeanor. Nia could see it immediately, doubt. The kind of doubt she'd encountered too many times before. "This isn't a commercial flight," he said, his tone edged with suspicion. "This area is for private jet owners and their guests." "I'm aware," Nia replied calmly. "I'm the owner." His lips pressed into a thin line. "Ma'am, this jet belongs to Horizons Unlimited. Are you sure you're in the right place?" The implication wasn't lost on her. Nia's smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. She reached for her phone and pulled up the flight confirmation email, holding it out to him. "You'll find that I'm exactly where I need to be." The guard hesitated before leaning closer to examine the screen. His frown deepened. "Just a moment," he said before disappearing behind the desk. Nia exhaled slowly, a flicker of frustration passing through her. She wasn't surprised. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned her presence in spaces like this, but it didn't sting any less. She could feel the stares intensifying, whispers fluttering from corners of the terminal. Minutes passed before the guard returned, accompanied by a younger man in a suit, his superior, perhaps. The younger man glanced at her, his expression apologetic, but it was clear he was trying to assess her as well. "Ms. Edwards," he began, his voice placating. "There seems to be some confusion. Can you confirm who you're meeting here?" Nia's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. "I'm not meeting anyone. I'm flying on my jet, which is currently waiting for me on the tarmac. Right, the man said, adjusting his tie nervously. It's just unusual for an owner to arrive without their crew or representatives. Nia's smile returned, sharp and unwavering. Well, I like to keep things simple, she said. Now, unless there's a specific reason I'm being delayed, I'd like to board my flight. The older guard interjected, his voice firmer now. We're just doing our due diligence, ma'am. It's standard procedure. Standard procedure, Nia repeated, her tone icy. Let me ask you this, if I didn't look the way I do, would you be questioning my right to board a jet I own? The room went silent. The younger man shifted uncomfortably, while the older guard's face hardened. Before either could respond, Nia's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and smiled. Excuse me, she said, stepping aside to take the call. Hello, David, she greeted the familiar voice of her operations manager. Yes, I'm at the terminal now. Could you confirm the flight details with the staff here? There seems to be some confusion. Within moments, Nia handed her phone to the younger man. His face paled as David's voice rang out, firm and authoritative. Nia watched as the situation unraveled exactly as she knew it would. The proof was undeniable, and the tables were turning swiftly. The older guard's expression shifted from suspicion to discomfort as realization dawned. The younger man handed the phone back to Nia, his voice faltering as he spoke. Ms. Edwards, I deeply apologize for the misunderstanding. Your jet is ready for boarding. Thank you, Nia said, her tone curt but professional. Now, I'd like to speak with the manager of this terminal. Both men exchanged nervous glances. The fallout was just beginning. The confrontation and reflection. The private terminal manager arrived within minutes. His polished demeanor and tailored suit did little to mask the tension in his gait. As he approached, his eyes darted between the security guard and Nia, already piecing together what had transpired. The air in the room was taut with unspoken accusations, and the weight of assumptions laid bare. Ms. Edwards, he began, extending his hand. I'm Alan Torres, the terminal's general manager. I understand there's been a misunderstanding, and I'd like to extend my sincerest apologies for the inconvenience. Nia shook his hand, her grip firm and unyielding. Mr. Torres, she said evenly, her tone measured. Thank you for coming promptly. I'd like to address this misunderstanding before I proceed to my flight. This is not the first time I've encountered this kind of behavior, but it will certainly be the last. Torres nodded, his expression one of practiced regret. Of course. We take these matters very seriously. Please, if you'll allow me, I'll ensure the situation is handled appropriately. Nia gestured to a nearby seating area. Let's sit, she said. I'd like to understand how your staff is trained and why it's acceptable for them to question the presence of someone who clearly has the credentials to be here. As they moved, she caught the older guard watching her, his face a mixture of defiance and unease. The younger man who had accompanied him was clearly relieved to step back, his eyes fixed on the floor. Nia's stride didn't falter. She wasn't here to make anyone comfortable. When they were seated, Torres folded his hands on the table between them. Ms. Edwards, I assure you, this was an isolated incident. We value every client who uses our terminal, and our team is trained to uphold the highest standards of professionalism. Nia raised an eyebrow. An isolated incident, she repeated. Mr. Torres, I've been flying private for years. This isn't new to me. And while I appreciate your attempt to smooth things over, I think you and I both know that isolated is a generous term. Torres shifted uncomfortably. I understand your frustration. The guard in question will be reprimanded immediately. Nia's gaze hardened. Reprimanded? This isn't about one individual. This is about the culture you've allowed to fester in your operation. Tell me, Mr. Torres, when was the last time you trained your staff on implicit bias? Torres blinked, caught off guard by the directness of her question. He began, but Nia cut him off. Because what happened today wasn't just a misstep, she continued. It was a reflection of unchecked prejudice. Your security guard looked at me and decided, without evidence or cause, that I didn't belong here. Despite my credentials, my flight confirmation, and my ownership of the jet on this tarmac, he chose to doubt me. Now, I ask you again, what are you doing to address this at its root? Torres exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping slightly under the weight of her words. You're right, he admitted. We focused on operational efficiency and security protocols, but we haven't addressed implicit bias directly. That's something I need to rectify. Nia leaned back in her chair, her expression softening slightly. Acknowledgement is a start, she said. But it's not enough. I've spent my entire career pushing past assumptions, breaking down barriers, and proving myself in rooms where I was underestimated. Today was just another reminder that the fight isn't over. Torres nodded, his face a mix of contrition and resolve. I'd like to learn from this, he said. If you're willing, I'd appreciate your input on how we can improve our training and policies. We need to do better, and I'd like to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Nia's lips curved into a faint smile. I'm willing to help, but let's be clear, this isn't charity. I'm invested in creating a world where women like me don't have to fight for the respect we've earned. I'll follow up with you after my trip to discuss actionable steps. Until then, I'll trust you to handle this incident appropriately. Torres stood, extending his hand again. Thank you, Ms. Edwards. I appreciate your understanding and your willingness to engage. Nia shook his hand, her grip firm as ever. Don't thank me yet, she said. Thank me when I see real change. As Nia finally boarded her jet, the sleek interior felt like a sanctuary. The pilot greeted her with a warm smile, and her preferred tea was already waiting on a polished tray. She sank into the plush leather seat and took a deep breath. The confrontation had left her drained but resolute. As the engines roared to life, her thoughts drifted to the countless times she'd faced similar moments. The boardrooms where her ideas were dismissed until repeated by someone else. The investors who questioned her credentials while ignoring her track record. The articles that framed her success as lucky instead of earned. But Nia had never let those moments define her. They were stepping stones, not stumbling blocks. Today's incident was no different. She would channel her frustration into action, just as she always had. Pulling out her notebook, Nia began jotting down ideas for the conversation she'd have with Torres after her trip. Implicit bias training. Diversity audits. Accountability measures. She knew these were just the starting points, but they were necessary. Her pen paused as she wrote a final note to herself, the world won't change unless we demand it. With that, Nia closed her notebook, sipped her tea, and turned her focus to the future. Her destination wasn't just another city or another meeting. It was another milestone in a journey that had always been about more than just her. It was about paving the way for others to follow, unencumbered by the biases she had to dismantle. The jet ascended into the sky, and Nia watched the clouds below with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't the end of the story. It was merely the beginning of another chapter. Turning adversity into advocacy. The next morning, Nia Edwards awoke in her hotel suite to the sound of city life bustling far below her window. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, illuminating the expansive space that served as both a temporary haven and a workspace for her journey. Her flight the previous day had been uneventful, yet her thoughts remained tethered to the incident at the terminal. It wasn't just a personal affront, it was emblematic of a broader issue she couldn't ignore. As Nia sipped her morning coffee, she reviewed the itinerary for the day. Meetings with international partners were scheduled back-to-back, each critical to the future of Horizons Unlimited. Yet, even as she prepared for these pivotal discussions, the weight of her encounter at the terminal lingered. She decided then and there, she wouldn't let it end with an apology and empty promises. This was an opportunity to spark change, not just in the private aviation sector, but in every space where implicit biases dictated who was welcome and who wasn't. Nia opened her laptop and began drafting an outline for what she envisioned as a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program. The proposal wasn't for Horizons Unlimited, her company was already a trailblazer in fostering an inclusive corporate culture. This was for the private aviation industry, a sector often shrouded in exclusivity and tradition. If change was going to happen, it needed to start with people like her, those who had fought their way into these spaces and knew firsthand what it felt like to be underestimated. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her flow. It was a message from Alan Torres, the terminal manager she'd confronted the day before. Alan Torres, "Good morning, Ms. Edwards. I hope your flight was comfortable. I wanted to follow up on our conversation. I've spoken to my team, and we're committed to addressing the issues you raised. If you have time, I'd appreciate your insights on where to begin." Nia stared at the message for a moment, her mind racing. Torres' willingness to engage further was encouraging, but she knew this couldn't be a surface-level fix. She replied swiftly. "Nia Edwards, good morning, Mr. Torres. Thank you for your message. I'm pleased to hear you're taking this seriously. Let's schedule a call next week to discuss concrete steps. I'll come prepared with a proposal." As she hit send, Nia felt a surge of determination. This was her chance to transform a personal slight into a movement. She spent the next hour refining her outline, drawing on her own experiences and research she'd accumulated over the years. Her proposal began to take shape, focusing on 3 pillars: education, accountability, and representation. Later that day, a meeting of minds. By mid-afternoon, Nia found herself in a sleek conference room overlooking the skyline of a bustling metropolis. Across the table sat her international partners, a mix of seasoned executives and emerging leaders eager to collaborate. The energy in the room was palpable, charged with the promise of innovation and growth. Nia's presentation was flawless. She spoke with the authority of someone who not only knew her business but also believed deeply in its mission. Horizons Unlimited wasn't just about profits, it was about creating opportunities, bridging gaps, and redefining what was possible. As the meeting concluded, one of the executives, a woman named Sophia Lopez, approached her. "Ms. Edwards," Sophia began, her voice warm, "your vision is inspiring. But what struck me most was your emphasis on diversity and inclusion as a cornerstone of your success. Can I ask where that commitment comes from?" Nia smiled, appreciating the sincerity in Sophia's tone. "It comes from necessity," she replied. "When you've spent your career navigating spaces where you're not expected or welcomed, you realize how much potential is wasted when systems favor the familiar over the exceptional. I built my company to challenge that norm. And now, I'm looking for ways to extend that impact beyond my own walls." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "Have you ever considered partnering with other industries to create a broader initiative?" The question sparked an idea. Nia had been so focused on addressing the private aviation sector that she hadn't considered the potential for cross-industry collaboration. If companies in finance, tech, healthcare, and beyond joined forces, the impact could be exponential. "I haven't," Nia admitted, "but I'd love to explore that. Perhaps we can discuss it further?" "Absolutely," Sophia said, her eyes lighting up. "Let's set up a time. This could be the start of something transformative." An evening of reflection. That night, back in her hotel suite, Nia sat by the window, watching the city lights twinkle like stars scattered across the ground. The day had been productive, even exhilarating, but she felt a deeper pull, a sense of responsibility to leverage her platform for something greater than personal success. She opened her notebook and began jotting down the seeds of a new initiative, one that would unite industries in a shared commitment to dismantling systemic biases. She envisioned workshops, mentorship programs, and scholarships designed to empower underrepresented individuals to break into fields where they were often excluded. She thought about the young black woman who might one day walk into a private terminal without having to brace herself for suspicion, knowing the path had already been cleared. Nia's thoughts drifted to her own journey. She remembered the mentors who had believed in her when others didn't, the allies who had amplified her voice, and the inner strength she'd cultivated in the face of adversity. Each experience had shaped her into the leader she was today, and now it was her turn to pay it forward. Before closing her notebook, she wrote a single line at the bottom of the page. Change doesn't happen in isolation. It's a collective effort, built on shared vision and unwavering resolve. As she turned off the lights and prepared for bed, Nia felt a renewed sense of purpose. The incident at the terminal was no longer just a moment of frustration. It was the catalyst for a movement she hadn't yet named but knew would define the next chapter of her journey. Tomorrow, she'd take the first step. And she wouldn't be taking it alone. Building bridges and breaking barriers. The conference room buzzed with anticipation. Nia Edwards sat at the head of a long, polished table, her laptop open and notes spread meticulously in front of her. Around her sat representatives from industries as diverse as tech, finance, healthcare, and aviation. Each of them had been invited to this unprecedented gathering because of their influence, resources, and their willingness to challenge the status quo. The air was thick with possibility. This was a room where change could begin. Nia stood, her presence commanding attention without her needing to demand it. She let her gaze sweep the room before speaking, her voice calm but resolute. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "Each of you represents industries that shape not only economies, but also the way society functions. Today, we're here to talk about what happens when those systems are built with blind spots, and more importantly, what we can do to change them." She clicked a button on her laptop, and the screen behind her illuminated with a bold title, "The Equity Initiative, Redefining Inclusion Across Industries." A collective murmur of interest rippled through the room. "We've all seen it," Nia continued. "Biases that are so deeply ingrained they're almost invisible to those who benefit from them. Policies that exclude rather than include. Cultures that reward sameness and penalize difference. This isn't just bad for people, it's bad for business." She gestured to the screen, where statistics appeared, studies linking diversity to innovation, data showing how inclusive companies outperformed their peers, and real-world examples of industries disrupted by underestimating talent outside the norm. "I know this because I've lived it," Nia said, her tone softening but losing none of its conviction. "I've walked into boardrooms where my expertise was questioned before I even spoke. I've had to fight for the respect and opportunities others are handed freely. And yet, here I stand. Not because the system worked for me, but because I refused to let it keep me out." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over the audience. Then, Nia's expression shifted, a spark of determination lighting her eyes. "But this isn't about me," she said. "It's about what we can do together. The Equity Initiative isn't just a call to action, it's a roadmap for change. It's about creating systems that recognize potential over privilege, and environments where everyone can thrive." The initiative takes shape. Over the next 2 hours, the room came alive with discussion. Nia outlined the 3 pillars of the Equity Initiative. Education, comprehensive training programs designed to uncover and address implicit biases at every level of an organization. These wouldn't be the superficial, checkbox exercises many companies implemented but deep, ongoing efforts rooted in real-world scenarios and measurable outcomes. Accountability, establishing systems to track progress and hold leaders responsible for fostering diversity and inclusion. This included transparent reporting, anonymous feedback channels, and third-party audits to ensure integrity. Representation, actively recruiting, mentoring, and promoting individuals from underrepresented groups. This wasn't about meeting quotas, it was about reshaping pipelines to reflect the world's true talent pool. The attendees listened intently, some nodding in agreement, others scribbling notes. When Nia opened the floor for questions and feedback, the room erupted into conversation. A tech executive raised his hand. "Ms. Edwards, these ideas are compelling, but how do we measure success in a way that resonates with stakeholders who are primarily focused on the bottom line?" Nia smiled. "Great question," she said. "The metrics need to be tied to both human and financial outcomes. For example, companies with diverse leadership are 35% more likely to have financial returns above their industry average. But beyond that, employee satisfaction, retention rates, and innovation metrics are just as important. This isn't just about doing what's right, it's about doing what's smart." A healthcare executive chimed in. How do we address resistance within our organizations? Not everyone is open to change, especially when it challenges their comfort zones. Resistance is inevitable, Nia acknowledged. But so is progress. The key is to approach it strategically, start with leadership buy-in, provide clear evidence of the benefits, and ensure ongoing communication. Change doesn't happen overnight, but with persistence and clarity, it's unstoppable. Forging alliances. By the end of the session, the room had transformed from a group of individuals into a coalition. Each representative committed to integrating the equity initiative into their own organizations and pledged to collaborate across industries to amplify its impact. Nia's heart swelled as she watched the partnerships form. This was what she had envisioned, a movement too large to ignore, fueled by the collective power of people who understood that the future belonged to everyone, not just a select few. As the attendees began to leave, Nia found herself in conversation with Sofia Lopez, the executive who had first suggested cross-industry collaboration. You've started something incredible here, Sofia said. But where do you see this going next? Nia considered the question carefully. I see this as the beginning of a cultural shift, she replied. One that extends beyond business. I want this initiative to influence education, policy, and even how communities are built. The potential is limitless if we stay committed. Sophia's eyes sparkled with admiration. Count me in, she said. Whatever you need, I'm here to support it. A global movement. Later that night, back in her hotel room, Nia reflected on the day's events. The equity initiative had been born from a single moment of frustration, yet it had already grown into something far greater than she'd imagined. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. She picked up her notebook and began drafting her next steps. An international summit to showcase progress. A digital platform to share resources and track outcomes. Partnerships with schools to nurture the next generation of leaders. As she wrote, a sense of fulfillment washed over her. This was her legacy, not just the success of Horizons Unlimited, but the doors she was opening for others. Nia had always believed in the power of perseverance, but now she was witnessing the power of unity. She closed her notebook with a satisfied sigh. Tomorrow was a new day, and the work was just beginning. But for the first time in a long time, she felt the tides shifting, carrying her vision closer to reality. The world was changing, and Nia Edwards was leading the charge. The legacy of leadership. Months had passed since the equity initiative had been launched, and the world was beginning to take notice. What had started as a single meeting in a sunlit conference room had evolved into a global movement. News outlets covered its progress with headlines like, "The CEO Redefining Leadership, Nia Edwards and the Equity Initiative and Industries Unite for Inclusive Change." But for Nia Edwards, the journey wasn't about accolades or recognition. It was about results. A vision realized. On a crisp autumn morning, Nia found herself standing in the middle of a bustling tech conference in San Francisco. The Equity Initiative had partnered with the event organizers to host a series of panels and workshops on diversity and inclusion. Attendees from all over the world streamed through the venue, their badges reflecting industries as varied as aerospace, education, and healthcare. One of the main attractions was a keynote panel featuring Nia herself, alongside other leaders who had embraced the initiative. The stage was set in a grand auditorium, the backdrop displaying the initiative's motto, Empower, Elevate, Evolve. As Nia stepped onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. She took her place at the center, flanked by her fellow panelists, Sofia Lopez, who had become a close collaborator, David Ching, a pioneer in renewable energy, and Priya Patel, a trailblazer in global health initiatives. Each had their own story of breaking barriers and challenging conventions, and each had become an advocate for the equity initiative. The moderator began with a simple question, "Nia, when you started this journey, did you ever imagine it would reach this scale?" Nia smiled, her hands resting lightly on the table. "If I'm honest, I didn't think about the scale," she said. "I thought about the need. I thought about the countless people, like me, who have been told in subtle and overt ways that they don't belong. And I knew that if we could create even one space where those people felt empowered, it would be worth it. The scale, that's just a testament to how many others saw the same need and chose to act. Stories of impact. During the panel, Sophia shared how her company had revamped its hiring practices, resulting in a 40% increase in workforce diversity within a year. David spoke about implementing mentorship programs that connected young innovators from marginalized communities with industry veterans. Priya described a groundbreaking initiative that brought women from underserved regions into leadership roles in healthcare. Each story painted a picture of progress, and each was rooted in the principles of the Equity Initiative: education, accountability, and representation. But it was the audience participation segment that revealed the true impact of their work. A young woman, barely out of college, stood at one of the microphones placed in the aisles. Her voice trembled as she addressed Nia directly. "Ms. Edwards," she began, "I just wanted to say thank you. Because of the Equity Initiative, I got an internship at a company I never thought would even look at my application. And now, I'm here, at this conference, surrounded by people I've always looked up to. You changed my life." The room erupted into applause, but Nia's expression was one of quiet pride. She leaned forward, her voice warm as she responded. "Thank you for sharing that," she said. "Your story is exactly why we're here. And I want you to remember, you earned that internship. Your talent and determination brought you here. All we did was open the door. The rest was all you." Looking forward. After the panel, Nia mingled with attendees, answering questions and listening to their ideas. Many wanted to know what was next for the Equity Initiative. Nia's response was always the same: the work doesn't end. This is just the beginning. In the weeks following the conference, the initiative continued to grow. Its digital platform became a hub for resources, networking, and success stories. Companies began to adopt its framework not just as a matter of ethics, but as a strategic advantage. Governments and educational institutions reached out, eager to integrate its principles into their policies and curricula. Nia, however, remained focused on the human element. She traveled tirelessly, meeting with teams on the ground, speaking at schools, and mentoring young professionals. For her, the true measure of success wasn't in numbers, but in the lives transformed. A legacy secured. 1 year to the day after the Equity Initiative's launch, a gala was held in its honor. Leaders from every corner of the globe gathered to celebrate its achievements and commit to its future. The event took place in New York City, in a grand hall adorned with banners bearing the initiative's motto. Nia stood at the podium, her heart full as she looked out at the crowd. Among them were old friends, new allies, and countless faces she didn't recognize but whose presence signified the initiative's reach. "Tonight," she began, "we celebrate what we've accomplished together. But more importantly, we reaffirm our commitment to what lies ahead. The Equity Initiative isn't about me or any one person. It's about all of us. It's about creating a world where talent, ambition, and creativity are recognized and nurtured, no matter where they come from. Together, we've proven that change is possible. And together, we'll keep pushing until it becomes the norm." The applause was deafening, and as Nia stepped away from the podium, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was her legacy, not just the success of Horizons Unlimited, but the doors she had opened for others, the voices she had amplified, and the barriers she had helped dismantle. As the evening drew to a close, Nia found herself standing by a window, gazing at the city skyline. Sophia approached, a glass of champagne in hand. "You did it," Sophia said, her voice filled with admiration. Nia shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "We did it," she corrected. "And we're just getting started." Together, they raised their glasses, toasting to a future defined by equity, opportunity, and the enduring power of collective action.